Hi there, Cal Holden here again with my media portfolio, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief history of film. Right, so the first half of this is going to be basically going through from the late 1800s to about midway through 20th century, giving you, a breakdown of when the major changes and new techniques came through, you know. And then for the latter half, I'm going to be giving you a decade by decade account of different film movements that came in, along with new auteurs, significant films, and major game changers of that decade, and forward in time, such as the arrival of VHS, which is currently having a revival at the moment in the horror community. But nevertheless, on with the list. Before I start, it is worth noting that cinema was not fully created by one person. For example, the Lumiere brothers were working on a device to record moving images at the same time that the Americans were developing celluloid. So, it's like an international cooperation. Right, so on with it. In 1885, the Lumiere brothers held the first public display of film, though the camera had only a minute's worth of footage, film inside it to film with. The films they produced in the time were the actualities, which showed a slice of life as it was lived. It's a minute of people doing mundane tasks such as leaving a factory, which was one of their famous ones. Okay, move forward to 1897. The Lumiere brothers basically they filmed a scene from the back of a moving train. This was the first attempt at going a camera movement, really, as the cameras were mounted on tripods, so it could not move. So yeah, first bit of camera movements. We move forward even further. We got 1897. The first rotating camera was built by Robert W. Paul. This was so he could capture the Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee procession in one shot. He put it on general sale a year later. After which we moved to 1905, the first permanent theatre showing only films, the Nickelodeon, opened in Pittsburgh. By that time, there was enough films to fill half an hour, and they could change them weekly so the audience wouldn't get bored. Yeah. After the success of the Nickelodeon, thousands cropped across the United States, and worldwide, became a big, a movement in creating places that specifically showed films. These were later known as cinemas, and first started cropping up. So yeah, in 1907, purpose-built cinemas opened across the UK, Britain, and France. So it's 5 years between the Nickelodeon to full-blown cinemas. I mean, 2 years. I meant 2 years, not 5. Yeah. Okay. In 1910, actors began to receive credit for their roles. Films began getting increasingly longer and began to feature proper plots and development. So, beginning of the films we know today. In 1927, quite a long jump, sound came into film with the releasing of The Jazz Singer, which featured the first use of synchronized dialogue and singing in a feature film, though it had been toyed with by the Warner Brothers for the past couple of years, but it was only perfected in The Jazz Singer, and it proved to be a runaway hit. So to the point where 3 years later, actually, in 1929, well, Hollywood was producing mainly all talkies. This sort of era is really lampooned and documented in Singing in the Rain, which starring Gene Kelly, which is a good film. Yeah, many actually claim that sound saved Hollywood in the face of the Great Depression and started what could be termed the golden age of Hollywood. This period typically reflects the time beginning with the introduction of sound up until the late 40s. During World War II, there was an influx of propaganda films, with the success. After the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Disney created a few more animated features, and in 1943, I can't pronounce this, but it's an Italian film, Ossioni, was screened in Italy, marking the beginning of the Italian neorealism. The last of which was 52's Umberto D. Also, in the late 40s, the British Ealing Studios released their famous and most beloved comedies. These include The Lady Killers and Passport to Pimlico, both of which are pretty good. And in 1941, RKO Pictures released the greatest film of all time, cited by many critics, and I do myself consider it to be one, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, which is decades ahead of its time in terms of its approach to narrative and lighting, not to mention the cinematography in general. It's fantastic. So yeah, find that one out. Now we come to the second half of this. So we're in the 50s. Right, the Cold War started to affect Hollywood mainly due to actors and directors and writers were basically being blacklisted as communists. This included most famously Charlie Chaplin, and so really a lot of unrest. Yeah, and it actually also translated into the films themselves. In this whole red fear, came across very few, quite a few of these sci-fi films being created in that era, such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which features the famous line, "They're here, they're here," which obviously was chosen to appear as was interpreted as communists appearing around us all over the place, well, in America mainly, and War of the Worlds. There's also a resurgence in biblical epics such as Ben-Hur, Spartacus, and the Ten Commandments. Also, low-budget horror and sci-fi films started using more gimmicks such as 3D to get people into the theatres, a technique that film producer William Castle would go on to carry using from the 50s into the 60s, with films such as The Tingler and so forth. He most famously dropped a glow-in-the-dark skeleton onto his audience and created electroshock buzzers underneath the seats to get the audience into a frenzy. But that's what I had to do back those days, in the early days of exploitation. And the drive-ins had to really pull the audience in a certain way. It's like, for instance, in the 50s, the only way to show nudity on screen was if it was in a health video. And most famously, the only in Mum and Pop. Yeah, Mum and Dad, that's it. The only way they could show, a female's certain area was through a birth video. Strangely enough. But it had to cause controversy to get people in the seats, so that's where exploitation marketing first came in. Properly. Yeah, if you want to know more about that, I'd check out the great fine documentary called American Grindhouse, which features many famous directors and insights into it. Or check out John Waters' This Filthy World, which features a lot about William Castle's techniques into getting people into cinema and the early days of exploitation cinema. But yeah, back to this. Yeah, okay, the 1960s, so next decade. Studio in Hollywood declined due to the fact that many films were being filmed on location in other countries. During this time, Hollywood churned out mainly family-targeted films, such as, Sound of Music, Mary Poppins. These proved to be fairly successful for them. Yeah, there's also an increase in public awareness of foreign language cinema, with audiences becoming increasingly familiar with directors such as Ingmar Bergman, Federico Fellini, and Jean-Luc Godard. Yeah. That's good. Okay, also, Midnight Cowboy became the first X-rated film to become Oscar nominated and gain critical acclaim. Stanley Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey became groundbreaking for its special effects that transfixed audiences, and its immense score, which is still breathtaking today. Also, Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider, or Stephen King calls it in Danse Macabre, the quintessential countercultural horror film, celebrates and mourned the end of the 60s countercultural hippie movement by use of employing, quite groundbreaking cinema verite style. It's also written by Terry Southern, and most of the scenes were ad-libbed. It also features a fresh-faced, Jack Nicholson, and it is a good film. With Roger Corman alumni, in action. And they've gone on to quite a few, have fantastic careers. I digress. Okay, Bonnie and Clyde marked the start of the new Hollywood movement. So, yeah, as we move along to the 70s, we lose the optimism of the 1960s cinema and move into more cynical filmmaking, which, really took hold of the 70s with films such as